Welcome to Work This Way, a labor and employment podcast. I'm Tina Emerson, here today with Maynard Nexsen attorney Jennie Cluvarius. Thanks for joining us, Jennie.
Thank you for having me, Tina.
Great to see you. And today we are joined by more members of the Maynard Nexsen team, David Garrett and Stephen Davis, both who oversee the firm's immigration and global mobility law practice. David and Stephen, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Good to see you. Well, let's talk about some of the basics of hiring foreign national talent in the U.S. What if I am a U.S. business and I've identified a foreign national student who's currently enrolled in college? What does that onboarding process look like?
Well, actually, this is a really good source for potential new employees for companies. It's to go and take a look at colleges and see, what's there, a job fair or at your career days or however, However, when you onboard these employees, you onboard them just like you would any other U.S. worker. So most of these employees will have something that's called OPT, that stands for Optional Practical Training, that affords them work authorization. And the students will have been prepped by their school's international office, and they'll already come prepared. They'll know, what is going to be entailed with that OPT training program. And they'll be able to come and approach you as the employer, and you would essentially hire them on just as you would any other U.S. worker at that point.
Related to that question, can we keep foreign national students as employees after their OPT or STEM OPT work authorization expires?
You can, but the key there is figuring out a visa type to get them on. So generally speaking, OPT is valid for 1 year. And then if you have a STEM degree, you can extend that for an additional 2 years. So you get, in STEM-related cases, someone who's got 3 years of work authorization with the company, whereas the company does not have to sponsor it. But that's where the H-1B lottery comes in most of the time. There are some other visa types, which we'll touch on a little bit later, but the H-1B is the most common visa type for OPT and STEM OPT students. So getting them in the H-1B lottery is key to extending their work authorization for them to work past that OPT or STEM OPT expiration date.
Yeah, most of the time, actually, that H-1B visa is the only visa that's going to be available to these workers. So, and having an employee that has graduated with a STEM degree can be absolutely key because of the H-1B visa lottery. Their chances of selection, may not be that high. And you as the employer want to have a student who's now an employee working for you have as many chances as you can possibly get to get into the H-1B visa lottery. Somebody on regular OPT, that's 1 year work authorization, generally they have one shot at getting the H-1B visa lottery. However, if they have a STEM degree, now that adds an additional 2 years of work authorization. That means that you can have 3 and sometimes even 4, depending on when they graduate, chances of entering them into the H-1B visa lottery before their work authorization here in STEM OPT ultimately runs out.
Well, let's get into the specifics of that lottery. Since it's coming up here soon, what do you need to know from an employer to determine if they have employees who are eligible for the H-1B lottery?
So the key there is to figure out if they are working in a specialty occupation. And what that means is the job has to require a degree in a specific specialty. So let's just take an example. Let's say it's a human resources position, or maybe just a general business position where the client says any bachelor's degree in any field will do for this job. That's probably not going to pass muster for an H-1B H-1B petition. So an ideal case is engineering job, requires an engineering degree or a computer science degree. So there's a specific field tied to that job duty and that job position. So we look at that on the front end. We talk to the client and say, let's look at the job description that you've got, and then let's look at the candidate that you've got. Let's look at their resume. Let's see if we enter them in the lottery, is this going to be a good case that could get selected?
And in many cases, what we'll do is we'll take their job description and combine that along with their transcript of the courses that they took at the university. And we'll see if we can make some changes and tweaks to job description. While the job description is absolutely true, we don't make anything up here, but we are able to to show that the coursework that they took in college adequately prepared them for entry into that occupation at that company as being a specialty occupation. And it's interesting, Stephen, that you brought up the idea, like, an ideal case as an engineer, because sometimes somebody who has graduated with just a general engineering degree can have a challenge getting an H-1B visa lottery approval, or actually just getting the H-1B visa approval in of itself, because the current stance of the USCIS has been going back and forth a little bit about this. And generally, a general engineering degree, even though the statute that authorizes H-1B visas says that engineering is a specialty occupation by statute, the way that the agency is implementing the regulations about defining what a specialty occupation is, sometimes just has a general engineering degree won't cut the mustard. And we can see some significant difficulties in trying to get H-1B visa approval for some engineering occupations.
It's very interesting. So let's assume that a company has identified several foreign national employees that it's determined are eligible to enter the H-1B lottery. What is the timeline and the next step or steps from there for the company?
So the timeline, I think, ideally should become, at the time of hire. So, when they have hired anybody that has a student visa and has OPT or STEM OPT work authorization, I think the timeline really kind of begins there to identify them. Hey, is this a potential candidate that the company wants to enter into the H-1B visa lottery? As far as like the calendar dates goes, the H-1B visa lottery, it happens at the very end of March. And we're able to enter candidates into the H-1B visa lottery at the beginning of March, and usually lasting 2 or 3 weeks in March. So I believe this year is going to happen during the first week of March, but then it's going to be open for a couple weeks after that. And during that time period, it doesn't matter if you're first in line or if you're the last in line, you have an equal chance of being selected in the H-1B visa lottery. However, there's generally a maybe 2.5 week window in which to make those visa lottery entrants there. So from most employers, we really are kind of zooming in and we're narrowing the candidate funnel down in January and February. That's when we're beginning to gather the information, and we are making appointments with our clients to actually do the visa lottery submission, throughout February, knowing that the first couple of weeks in March are going to be really busy.
Definitely. And another key point there too is when we enter the submission for the lottery, we've got our analysis of, we know what the job description is, we know their background, we know they either have a U.S. master's degree or higher, or either they don't, and that's also an important factor to determine where they're going to get selected in the lottery. But when we enter the application, it really is a one-page electronic application and a $10 filing fee this year, although we've learned that that's going to increase to $245 next year per person. So it is really like submitting a sheet of paper and then saying, am I going to get picked? If you get picked, we'll find out that first week of April, and then we have 90 days to submit the entire application packet to show that you meet the H-1B specialty occupation criteria.
Right. There's actually kind of, I think, a myth out there. So right now, it only costs $10 of a filing fee to enter somebody into the H-1B visa lottery. Next year, that increase, the filing fee from the government is going to significantly increase. However, from the employer's point of view, you want to know that the people that you're entering into the H-1B visa lottery is going to be a good candidate for the visa lottery. You don't want to waste those available slots. So it's really important to be working, with your counsel so that you know that this candidate would be approvable if your lottery submission was selected for adjudication. One of the last things you want to do is submit somebody into the H-1B visa lottery, but then find out at the time of visa preparation, or even worse, after a visa denial, that your candidate that you spent all this time and money and resources, training up for your position at the company, they can't get an H-1B visa because it won't be approved. So there is some prep work that should happen for each H-1B lottery registrant, even though the filing fee right now is only $10. On the employer end, the analysis needs to be much deeper than that. Even going down to what is the required wage that the employer has to pay that particular worker. Because as the employer, you don't want to be surprised and say, oh, I have to pay them how much? Where before, you were paying them perhaps a lesser amount.
And after that H-1B visa is approved, can the employee stay in the U.S. and continue to work, or do they need to get a new H-1B visa in their passport right away?
Generally, if we file what's called a change of status, let's just take a sample case where we've got an F1 student who's working on STEM OPT. They get selected in the lottery. We file their application, they get approved, and we file that as a change of status. We're telling USCIS to change them from F1 to H-1B, which will take place effective October 1. That's the earliest date that you can be in H-1B status. So even though your passport has an F1 visa in it, you wake up October 1 after approval as an H-1B person, an H-1B status. Now, if you plan to travel internationally, which most foreign nationals will want to leave at some point, they are going to have to get an H-1B visa appointment at the embassy or consulate in their home country, usually outside of the U.S. So yes, you can stay here, you can continue to work, you can remain here legally in H-1B status, but for future travel, it's best to schedule an H-1B visa appointment. And what we've seen, I think, with a lot of our clients is they usually wait till around the holidays to schedule a visa appointment then when they know they're going to be going home anyway. And then they take their H-1B approval notice that we got with them. They schedule a visa appointment at the embassy, and then they go for an interview, get the H-1B visa stamped in their passport, and then come back in on the H-1B. And then they will use that H-1B visa for travel in the future. The H-1B visa is going to be initially good for 3 years and can be extended for another 3 years. So that's another thing too, if you're not familiar with the H-1B lottery. Once you get in the lottery, we don't have to enter the lottery every 3 years. We're not dealing with those one and whatever the odds, crazy odds are, chances. You get in the lottery first, I mean, it is.
As if
you're winning the lottery.
Exactly. Right, getting in the lottery is one thing, but being selected in the lottery, then you're golden. And that October 1st date, that's like a magical date, because even though the person has entered, the United States on a student visa, F1 visa, that's the visa that's in their passport. After H-1B visa approval on October 1st, it's like magic. Suddenly now they're in H-1B visa status. The employer now gets to do a Section 3 update re-verification under Form I-9, which I think is an important step that most employers fail to do after that October 1st date. And there's also a lot of confusion that a lot of people have over, well, what's a visa? Because you were here on a student visa, now October 1st, you're an H-1B visa, but the visa that's in your passport is still going to say student visa. I think one of the best ways for people and employers to think about the visas are like the visa in the passport is like an entry ticket to the United States. And once that ticket has been used and they've entered the United States, the term of their stay is governed by a different document that's called a Form I-94. And when a person in H-1B visa status has gotten approved on that, as part of the approval notice from the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, they're going to receive a new Form I-94 that will put them, as of October 1st, into H-1B visa status. But remember, the visa in their passport, that's like your entry ticket. So if they leave the U.S. even after getting the H-1B visa status, their former visa, student visa, is no good anymore. They need a new entry ticket. They need a new visa in their passport to re-enter the United States on an H-1B visa. And that's an important thing, I think, for the employers to monitor and help their employees with also, because one of the last things you want as an employer, hey, you've got somebody's been working for you 2 or 3 years on OPT and STEM OPT. You've been watching them grow and become part of your company. They got into the H-1B visa lottery, yay. Now they've got their H-1B visa approval. They go home to go see mom and dad. It's been a few years since they've left the U.S. What happens then? They need a new visa in their passport, which means they need to go to a U.S. embassy. And the U.S. embassy, that's not an automatic yes. So keeping counsel informed and throughout that process will help get that employee back into the United States and resume their stay in H-1B visa status.
I think somewhat related to that too, and a good point, is after H-1B selection, when you're in the lottery, we like to tell employers to tell their clients and keep us all up to date on any travel plans during that period, because there can be times that if we filed an H-1B, the full application packet, change of status, and then the employee leaves the U.S. without us knowing, that can cause some problems.
It can cause a denial even. So With most of our clients, we'll actually provide HR, like we just call it an information sheet about the travel. And we use it for a couple different purposes. One, so that the employee can inform HR, hey, I'm leaving, right? And HR can coordinate with us. But we're also asking the employee to confirm their current employment details. It's been surprising to me the number of times that HR doesn't quite know that their worker has changed their roles lately, has a new job title, or has taken on some new duties. And all that can affect their visa status in the U.S.
I think all of that shows that have some preemptive counsel is always helpful in these situations to keep your employees from leaving and never being able to come back without a significant amount of help. Now, Jennie, I know in your practice you work with a lot of companies that are in a variety of industries, and you need to call on employment attorneys here at the firm quite a bit.
Absolutely. And in my practice, which is more of a traditional employment practice, we find that immigration-related issues crop up all the time. And we are frequently calling on Stephen and David to help our clients and plug them in with our clients to get these issues managed. And the moving of people is something that they do incredibly well.
Well, thank you both for being here with us today. We appreciate you. We appreciate what you do for our clients here at the firm. And thanks for taking the time to join us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Jennie.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time on Work This Way.